Hello, thank you for joining everyone. We're gonna get started soon, but if you wanna, let's mute yourselves just in case there's some background noise, but if you wanna turn on your video, that'd be really great because we have heard our speakers do like speaking to people's faces rather than just screens with our names on them. But also if you don't want to, it's totally fine. We will be recording this talk and posting it on our YouTube channel at Hack Duke. So if you have missed the beginning or have to leave in the middle for something, you can go on there and watch it later. And then also, if you want to have any questions, feel free to put them in the Zoom chat and Melvin can help answer them after the call. But yeah, with that, I think we can get started. We will have people coming in, like trickling in, but yeah.
Great, sounds good. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Just a second. All right, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Perfect. Cool. So I'm gonna just give a brief intro of myself just for those new folks that came in. So welcome everyone. My name is Melvin Hines and I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Upswing. We work with colleges and universities across the country to specifically help to improve the completion rates and ultimately the graduation rates of their online students, as well as their non-traditional students. A big part of the reason why I wanted to do today's talk, titled Just Like Me, Why Creators of EdTech Should Mirror Their Users' Background, is because what I've tended to notice is that there's typically, especially in the, I think, startup space, particularly in the startup space when you're raising a lot of VC funding, where there ends up being sometimes a disconnect between the folks that are creating the platforms and the folks who are the end users of the platforms. And while a lot of times people will think that that's fine, that's okay, that's not necessary, what tends to happen are some pretty major consequences. And that's a big part of the reason why I wanted to really have this talk here today. I usually like to, be able to have it as conversational as possible. Obviously, there's a lot of people on this call right now, but certainly feel free to drop any sort of questions or anything that you have down. I'll try to answer them as quickly as I can. So here we go. The first thing that I wanted to kind of throw you guys back to is 2017. So November 2017, Tim Cook, of course, another Duke grad, ended up launching the iPhone 10. And this was revolutionary in a whole lot of different ways, whole host of different ways. But one particular area that was, I think, particularly astounding was that in order to make the screen visible from top to bottom with as few bezels as possible, they wanted to move from the fingerprint type approach to a face unlock type approach. Everyone who has an iPhone today knows that that's what they ended up moving to. And so this was supposed to be a huge revolutionary change, leaps and bounds that were taking place. However, and that was the case for the vast majority of all users. However, there were some people that did have adverse experiences. The New York Times highlighted how if you were a white man, the error rate was less than 1%. But if you were either a female or a minority, the error rate was upwards of 35%. Essentially what was happening here was that the folks that were creating the technology, creating the software that determines whether or not they could recognize you, weren't always the users of that technology. And it was that sort of distortion that was part of the reason why there was such a big error rate. And they've had to go back and create new software updates and things like that to really try and fix that. Several of my friends have, of course, talked about that being a particular issue for themselves. One particular astounding article that I found was about how Apple actually just decided to go ahead and refund Chinese people because what was happening was there were complaints from specifically Chinese women that they could have their phones unlocked by their friends, their colleagues, others that they tested it with, because they didn't detect they detected too much of a similarity with the face unlock. And so once again, this was an example of people who are creating the software, not necessarily always representing the people who are using the software. But it goes beyond that as well. Facebook, they are of course known for being basically the 800-pound gorilla in the room when it comes to being able to serve ads, being able to create an ad experience that's completely tailored and justified for their various users. But the same thing happened here as well, right? There was a study conducted last year that showed that white users were much more likely to get home sales shown, and the type of home sales that were shown were typically much more likely to be catered towards white users. Conversely, if you were seeing job ads for jobs such as janitors, taxi drivers, things of that nature, you're more likely to be a minority than a white user. And then the same thing between men and women. Job ads for nurses and secretaries were actually, and this was all automatic, all through their algorithm. They just so happened to be pulled out. Job ads for nurses and secretaries were much more likely to be portrayed for women. And you know, story after story goes on from there. Going through TSA, Black women are typically more likely to be stopped than any other group, and it's specifically because of their hairstyles. And so what we're noticing over and over again is that as we're depending upon technology to help move the needle forward, not having those same people be the creators of that technology are creating adverse consequences for various segments of people. And it was really within that scope of knowledge that I walked into the ASU GSV conference. This is probably about a year or two ago. So for those of you all who don't know, ASU GSV is pretty much the largest ag tech conference that takes place anywhere in the country. ASU stands for Arizona State University, and then GSV is actually a venture firm that has been hosting this conference for, in this case, the last 10 years. And so I was invited to speak at this conference. I came to the conference, and while I was there, I decided to attend another panel that was specific to talking about how can we help move the needle and increase support for specific subsets of students, typically your minorities and non-traditional students, increasing their likelihood of graduation. And everyone on the panel came in with their different perspectives, but there was, I remember one particular person that was there, and they had a chatbot. Essentially, it was a texting chatbot that would allow for students to get answers automatically for whatever types of questions that they have. And one of the things that they mentioned was that, you know, we noticed that minorities actually tend to utilize our platform more than anyone else. And the person who was hosting the conference or hosting that particular panel said, that's interesting, why is that? And he said, I have no idea. Well, the person who said that was someone of some I'd say pretty high affluence, from a pretty, you know, went to a really good college, had a pretty affluent background. Of course, they wouldn't understand why it would, for example, first-gen minorities, why that would be something that was such a big barrier to be able to overcome. For me, that was something that I knew off the top of my head. And by the way, my company creates a chatbot as well. And we've tailored it towards these particular types of students because of the experiences that we've had. So this is essentially a highway that's in Georgia that takes me from my hometown of South Georgia to Americus, where my mom used to actually go to college. And we would travel up and down this road, oh man, 2-3 times a week. It was definitely not fun. And I had no idea why we were traveling up and down this road all the time, my middle school and high school years. I eventually was able to see why this was so important when, oh, and by the way, this is the college that she went to, Georgia Southwestern State University. I eventually was able to see why this was so important for her to make these types of sacrifices and for all of us to go through these sacrifices, when I was actually able to see her graduate as valedictorian of her class. From there, she was able to get a degree in IT, and really help change, I think, the career trajectories of not just myself, but my siblings as well. And all of us are now off doing, really great things as well. It was really, that experience that led me to recognize why it's so important to give everyone that same opportunity to succeed. But it was also that experience that led me to understand why those who are the first in their families to succeed, why those who might be the one person who's a minority, for example, on an entire campus that doesn't quite look like them, might be a little bit more off-put with the idea of walking into, for example, a tutoring center or an advising center and feeling like they're the ones that everyone's looking at saying, oh, I expected it to be you that would need that help. Even if no one's, around them saying that, it's the feeling, right? And that's a big part of the reason why we created the tools that we created here at Upswing. So this is our Upswing ecosystem. What we have are three key tools. The first is a virtual assistant that I was telling you about, Anna. And the whole idea is that we're going to nudge students the second that they come on campus, saying this, our entire goal is to make sure that from the day that you get your acceptance letter on campus to the day that you get your offer letter from a job, we're going to be there with you every step of the way. And by doing that, we've been able to give a voice to people who felt voiceless for so long. And that's really the reason why tools like this are created and why we decided to create the platform that we created. We've also created a student engagement platform that ties into it so that if you are trying to access, say, a campus tutor, advisor, mentor, counselor, maybe talk to someone about what it's like to have a career in a certain field, you can do that as well. And of course, we have our 24/7 online tutoring that rounds it out so that even if it's nights and weekends, you can get that connection as well. But the entire goal of our Upswing ecosystem was to make it as easy as possible for first-gen students, for non-traditional students, for online students to be able to have the exact same opportunity to succeed and graduate as everyone else. Because, and I'm sure everyone here is noticing this now, even if you're an online student, you pay the exact same amount of money for tuition than everyone who's on campus. And so the fact that non-traditional students, the fact that online students don't get to have that same benefit was a big issue for us. And that's why we created Upswing. So here's a quick look at just who we actually serve. We serve people, half of our students are actually from households of under $30,000. Many of our students are working while in college. We have lots of folks who are Black or brown on our platform. And we really wanted to support people who are, like I said, online. So 1 in every 3 students are online, 1 in every 4 are adult learners. So we're really trying to go after a specific segment, right? And to go after that segment, oh, and by the way, these are the types of questions that we get as a result. People who might have, mental health questions that they're trying to deal with, folks who are trying to drop a class, but they can't get to the right person on time, people who are having trouble getting feedback from their professor. These are the types of things that we've been trying to pull out from Anna, and we understand why those things are happening. So we've been able to create the tools that make it easy for them to get the help that they're looking for. That's our entire goal, right? We're trying to, even with our tutors, we're trying to create tutors that emulate the students, folks who've come from the same background, folks who maybe were first generation themselves, people who were not traditional students themselves. It's so important as you're thinking about the types of tools and technologies that you're creating, that you're not just thinking about the tool itself. You're thinking about the entire ecosystem. And that's one of the big issues that I think that we really need to resolve here in the edtech space, is that there are just too many instances where the folks who are supposed to be using the technology are just completely different from the folks who are creating the technology. At one point in time, when we were doing our texting app, we were asked, why are you going the chat-based route? Why aren't you doing, say, an iOS app or an Android app like everyone else does? And the thing was that we actually were going down that route. We were thinking about that back in 2014, 2015, what's the best way that we should make this happen? So we decided, you know what we'll do? We'll just actually talk to our students and ask them, what do you use on a day-to-day basis? And by and large, the vast majority of our students at that point in time were telling us that they might use an iPhone or they might have a Samsung phone, but in a lot of cases, they didn't have broadband internet access. They didn't have Wi-Fi at home. They couldn't depend on 4G LTE. So basically, if we were going to get in contact with them, if their school was going to get in contact with them, the best way that we're going to be able to do that was through texting. And that's why we created the texting tool. And so for so many people, they looked at it and said, man, that is so backwards. You know, everyone's creating apps. Why aren't you creating an app? And it turned out that by creating the texting tool, we were actually able to reach out to, and today we reach out to over 60% of all students who have access to our platform. And so that's really what it's about, is knowing the why behind what you're doing and making sure you're catering towards that why, and not necessarily just catering towards what everyone else is telling you to do. So here's a quick look at some of the things we've been able to do as a result. I think the most important thing is the 1,000 students per month who would have dropped out that we've been able to keep in school. So far, we've been able to prevent over 30,000 dropouts from happening. And the entire goal behind that, right, is that we have to have a team that can speak to the needs of those particular students. That's what we've been able to do. But it's really hard to do that when, as an entire industry, it's hard to do that when so few people look like the people who they're actually supporting. Only 9% of all venture-backed organizations are female-led. And as we know, over half, or almost to over half of the United States are females. In fact, if you're taking a look at those who have the purchasing power, females tend to, you know, in a lot of cases be heads of households, but if only 9% are female-led, just think about how that's skewing the types of products that are being created, right? I always give people the example of Shark Tank, where, just because everyone has seen it, where you know, you have these sharks that are sitting there, and then you usually, you know, you'll have a female who goes up and starts pitching an idea for something, and if none of the female sharks are there, you'll sometimes hear the male sharks say things like, you know, I really admire, you know, your work ethic and the work you put into all this, but I just don't get the product, and I don't invest in products that I don't get. And so as a result, I'm going to pass. Well, what is not being recognized is the fact that that happens over and over and over again. And as a result, when you're not investing in the female-led organizations, you're also not getting female-led products. It's just not happening. There's the founder of Spanx talks about this, about all that she had to go through in order to create her product. And the same thing is the same for minority founders. You know, just 1% of all VC-backed organizations are founded by Black or brown people. It's the exact same issue, right? So, for example, you know, when we were creating Upswing, we ran into some of those same walls, right? Those same issues of people saying, well, look, I see that you're trying to help non-traditional students, you're trying to help online students, but I mean, I wasn't one of those students, you know, I wasn't a non-traditional student, so I just don't get it, right? And of course, there's confirmation bias around, you know, what does a successful founder look like? So we had a very hard route trying to get Upswing to where it is today. But today, we support over 800,000 students. Clearly, there was a need that was there. But the issue comes in when we're not actually supporting the folks who need to be supported at the numbers that it takes for these products to actually get out there in the marketplace. And if it wasn't for, you know, for those who did believe in us, we wouldn't have been able to prevent 31,000 dropouts today. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important for that connection to be there, for that passion to be there as well. This was an article that I thought was just really interesting, really interested to share with you all as well. If you guys have time to take a look at it, it's really interesting because it's an edtech startup that wrote an entire blog post about what happened that caused them to shut down. And I liked that one of the key things that they mentioned was beware of the empathy gap between teachers and entrepreneurs. why that is so important is the same reason why it's important for the folks on Shark Tank to give opportunities to people who don't necessarily look like them, is that entrepreneurs tend to kind of have this mindset, and it's useful, it's needed, but the mindset is typically that my product is great, it's amazing, and I'm out here, you know, if I'm the hammer, everything's the nail. I'm out here to fix all the different issues. And in ed tech, you know, education is slow, higher ed is slow, everything is bad about the way they're doing it, and I'm here to fix it. Well, that's not what people in higher ed are looking for. They're looking for partners. They're looking for people who can actually help them to think about what are ways in which we can scale these opportunities together to do things like survive the COVID pandemic. And when those things aren't taking place, they're not comfortable working with them. And this is one of the things that you kind of saw here in this article as well. So if you have an opportunity, just read that article if you're thinking about doing anything within ed tech. I think it's really helpful for everyone to take advantage of. What we've learned is, of course, we want to make sure that our team is empathetic with the needs of the people that are working within higher ed. Not sympathetic, but empathetic, right? That as a result, half of our team and the majority of our founding board, of our board of directors, are actually minorities. Many of our team members are folks who grew up in small towns just like mine in Albany, Georgia. So they're used to community colleges, they're used to technology that's not always cutting edge. Um, half of our team are people that went to either an HBCU, stands for Historically Black College, or an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution, or a community college. So when we say that we partner with half of all of our partners are community colleges, and we work with 5% of all HSIs in the country, and we work with 15% of all HBCUs in the country, what we're basically saying is that we understand and recognize the needs that are there, because we're making sure that our team emulates that. And this is really important. For anyone who's even thinking about being an entrepreneur, this is really important, because everyone is certainly, I think, talking about diversity nowadays. But what I've noticed in particular is that diversity is kind of a thing that people try to check the box for kind of towards the end, as opposed to in the beginning. And so I get the question all the time: how do you have such a diverse staff? What are you doing to create that diversity? You know, did you hire a chief diversity officer or something like that? The answer is simple. It needs to be infused into the entire aspect of your hiring and recruiting, onboarding, and just your the culture that you want to create in your organization. So for us, we don't create job descriptions that say things like, you know, looking for people to kill it all day and night, like, you know, like we're like, you know, we're creating this like this fun party atmosphere, things like that, because basically we know that we're trying to also get people who can't kill it all day and night. We want parents to be part of the folks who are working at Upswing. We want people to have a family life outside of Upswing as well, and that they can bring that perspective in, because as you saw earlier, a significant percentage of our students are student parents. And so we need to know what that experience is like. When we're looking at applications, and this is something that I think that a lot of people kind of get wrong. 50%, this is a study that is pretty well known, 50% of, or Black people are 50% less likely to get a job interview based upon their name as white people, right? So this is a study that I believe a lot of people know. What they did was they just took the same resume out, changed the names, and saw who got callbacks, essentially. That's the part of the process that is broken for so many startups, right? I live in Austin. It is a very, very, very white city. But the way that we've been able to create the diversity that we've created is that we give people a chance and an opportunity from day one. When you do that with the resumes that you're getting in, and you're not just saying, oh man, this name, it sounds like a name that I can't pronounce, so I'm not gonna pull them through, then your final applicant pool, the final people you're thinking about, maybe the final 3 or 4 people, they're all going to be, not always, but they're going to be more likely than not a diverse group of people. And so then you don't have to worry about diversity at the very end of the line, because you made sure to correct people who might implicitly bias uh, themselves out of picking diverse people in the very front of the line. And so that's what's really important when you're trying to create this type of environment as well. And by the way, just to round this out, we also wanted to make sure there were people who we hired that are taking online courses, because how can we be a platform that supports online students and we don't have people who know what the online experience is themselves? And so that's how we think about the people that we're hiring. So when I'm thinking about how can we create change, right? Uh, for me, it's really kind of three important things. One, I think that in all of our classrooms, we have to encourage the innovation mindset. What I mean by that is that this has to start in high school, as to go throughout college. Everyone has to be thinking about this innovation mindset, because the folks who are graduating today and going to get jobs are tomorrow going to be the people who are the managers. And so they have to make sure that they're thinking about this in the same sort of way that everyone else is, right? They have to think about what are the gaps that we have in an organization, and how do we make sure we share those that we feel for those gaps as we're moving along. Second, this kind of got looks like it got cut off, but we need to promote solutions and apps that are actually being supported by people who look like and who come from backgrounds of the people that they're supposed to be serving. I think that this is immensely important. It is so important because we need to ensure that students who are using the services are going to also feel confident about using them as well. Too many times when you are using a technology that you're not used to, you can feel like, man, I'm the dumb one. I'm the one who is struggling. So clearly this isn't for me. And that causes you to drop out as well. And so if we really start to create empathy within our organization, I think that we'll see a huge growth there as well. And, finally, we need to hold companies, specifically edtech companies, but companies in general, accountable for representation in their hiring practices. This is from day one. Like I said earlier, it's not, oh, now we've got two candidates remaining. Both of them are great. Let's pick the one that's more diverse. That's not the way that you do it. You do it from the very beginning. You do it by creating an even playing field and making sure that people have the same opportunities to succeed in day one and don't get biased from there. And then you have the same strict regiment that you have for your hiring practices from then on. If you do these three things, I think that we can really start to create that change. We really start to create products and tools, specifically in ed tech landscape, but in general, and technology in general, that can really help support student success as well as student growth as well. And that's really what all this should be about. So these are the three things that I've thought of. I, of course, am just one person. I'm an N of one. I think that it's really important for all of us to think about what are other ideas that we can do to continue to make sure that we're emulating those users when we're creating our technology products. So this is just really kind of a challenge to you and everyone out there to just continue thinking about what are some of the things that can continuously be done to make sure that that playing field is leveled, so that the right products and the greatest products are always seeing the spotlight, not just the ones that are feeling a particular bias that we might have. And finally, I just wanted to leave you with this quote that I saw from a recent TED Talk. Francis Frey, who worked at Uber but is currently a Harvard professor, said that diversity is not on the burden of the diverse; it is an obligation for us all. And I think that this is really important, because when we're thinking about diversity, it's not just important and incumbent upon us to just think about the people who are the minorities supporting diversity. It should be everyone who's thinking about supporting diversity. In my case, I've really thought about, from our organization, for example, how do we make sure that we have people who are on all sides of the political spectrum? Because we work with schools that are in urban areas and we work with schools that are in rural areas. So I need to make sure that whatever my voice is isn't the only voice in the organization that's being heard. Same thing for the fact that I recognize that as a male, I have to also balance out, my ideas as well. So when we're thinking about our organization, we want to make sure that we are hearing all sorts of voices from the gender perspective as well. We want to hear all voices from the minority perspective. Boosting minorities doesn't just mean boosting Black people for me. It means boosting all voices. And so those are some of the things that we need to think about, because we're not always in a minority seat. We might be in a minority seat for a particular type of diversity, but we're also in a majority seat for some types of diversity as well. It might be from an international perspective. And it still is incumbent upon us to have that obligation to think about it. And really, you know, being folks who are all affiliated with Duke, we have to recognize that we're in a position of privilege that means that we have a much greater obligation to be able to break down some of those barrier walls. And because of that, it's really incumbent upon us to have these types of conversations and make sure that we're continuing to moving forward. So with that, I am pretty much done with my presentation. I want to thank you all for your time and for listening to me. And yeah, willing to take any sort of questions that you might have.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Melvin. We actually do have some questions in the chat. So I think this was asked a little earlier, but first one's from Yola. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, sorry. It's, could you define what a non-traditional student is?
Oh yeah, I should have done that earlier. So non-traditional students are typically students who don't fit your typical 18 to 22-year-old college student type model. Usually they're not people who are going on campus for 4 years to get an education. In a lot of cases, especially, I can speak a lot about North Carolina because that's where we actually started Upswing. In North Carolina, what we've seen is that there are a lot of people that got jobs in, say, textile workers or textile work, for example, and then because of basically the way that the market changed, tons of those towns just got completely decimated. And so they're coming back to get reskilled in things like manufacturing, nursing, EMT. And it's really, you know, and so they're coming back as adult learners. Sometimes they're working, sometimes they have families. As a result, a lot of times they're taking night classes, weekend classes, online classes. Funnily enough, it might sound like a very small segment, but today, over half of all students to go to college are non-traditional students. And so it's actually becoming a larger and larger proportion of the people who are going back to get an education.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. The next one is from Steve. He said, I agree with that. It must have been something during your talk. And if you apply at a job where you don't see people who look like you, do you think it's worth your time to work there?
That's a good question. I think, you know, I think that what tends to happen is you do tend to kind of walk the other way because you, number one, don't feel like you're going to be supported, or alternatively, once you get in the job and you might recognize that you're not being supported, you probably will end up leaving pretty quickly afterwards. And so then you end up just kind of doing it anyway. For me, I think that there should be no reason why you can't see diversity, unless it's a team of, I don't know, 5 or something like that, why you can't see yourself within the people who are working there. If you can, my assumption would be that they're probably not doing the right things to make sure that folks like you really feel comfortable in that organization. And so to me, that probably would be at least a yellow flag that it's probably not the place that you want to ultimately spend a lot of time at.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. And then so far, last question from Lydia. First of all, you are incredibly insightful and definitely gave me a better understanding of the importance and diversity in the creation of products. And the question is Upswing looking towards helping distance elementary education in the near future? It's not an easy thing to solve right now, especially in minority households or those that don't have great access to distance learning, also middle and high school.
Yeah, no, it's definitely really, really difficult. You're right. Actually, funnily enough, that's how we started. That's where we originally began back in the day. So I really wanted to impact people who came from backgrounds like mine. And so middle school, elementary school, high school. By the way, in my high school, I had, this might have been in my bio, there were 250 people in my class and only 68 of us graduated. So for me, I was really wanting to find ways to help impact folks in that area. The reason why we didn't go there originally is just because there's so much bureaucracy in K-12 that it's for a startup that doesn't really have a ton of funding in the early days, it's really difficult to navigate. Just by way of example, let's say that there's a ninth grade kid that you really want to help to impact. Well, to do that, you have to get permission from the superintendent, the principal, their teacher, their parent, and themselves, just to be able to get them to use whatever help or support that you want to get them. And so it was because of that that we decided to instead look at other areas that we could still have a pretty strong hold in. And so we started looking at community colleges. And the benefit of community colleges was that there's a lot of dual enroll students. So because of our work with community colleges, we actually work with about almost 100,000 students today that are in K-12. But they're taking, perhaps one or two classes through community colleges. And then we also work with the North Carolina Virtual Public School System, which is about 50,000 students itself. So I do, that's kind of a long way of saying that I do want to ultimately find ways to impact elementary school education, K-12 for sure. I think that where we are at this point in time is really thinking about how can we help support people who are dealing with non-academic barriers to student success. So it's more so about how can we do things like providing childcare services? How can we help with financial aid and emergency aid? Things like that that can really help just decrease some of those barriers as much as possible. That's kind of where our short-term goal is at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Y'all are taking great steps. Thank you. And then lastly, I know we're running a little, we have about 1 minute left, but from Anna, how do you create an environment of support from people from all backgrounds at Upswing?
Yeah, so I think that from a CEO perspective, it's really about. I think that a lot of times people who are running organizations think that the best way that you prevent conflict is to make sure that you stay out of everything, and that is definitely not 100% not true. What you have as an obligation as a person who's the CEO or as a person who has management responsibilities is to make sure that all voices are heard and amplified. And so, yes, that's going to mean that some people might, feel like uh, they're not able to talk as much as they would like to at certain points in time. But you know what? That part is important. So when you're sitting around a table and the same three people are talking over and over again, just recognizing that, hey, there's someone over here to the right that hasn't said anything the whole time, right? I want to get their perspective and understand what they say, because part of what I've noticed is that the people who are the quietest usually are ruminating, and when they say what they're going to say, it's going to be something that's immensely insightful that someone else hasn't said. They just have a higher threshold for talking. I have also noticed the same thing when it comes to how we celebrate different things. In our organization, we've celebrated Diwali basically every year. We celebrate Chinese New Year every year. And none of these are me saying everyone has to celebrate these things. It's creating a culture where when someone says, hey, I want to express my culture for the team, is this something that I can do? That we create that avenue. We don't just say yes, but we say, like we amplify the voice. And so it's those things, those little things at those particular points in time that really create an environment that causes folks to say, this is the place that I want to stay at. The last thing that I'll say about this is that we actually just recently hired a chief revenue officer. Her name's Christine Wyatt. And I'm hoping that she's okay with me saying this, but she literally just last week said, by the way, she had invested in us about 5 years ago and decided to join our team full time last year. And she said, what made me decide to join Upswing, because I had tons of other opportunities, what made me decide to join Upswing was that I sat in on an engagement meeting. And I was so impressed to see how many and how diverse were the people who were leading that meeting. That showed me that you care about hearing everyone's voices and not just about hearing your own. And that really struck me. I mean, this was, you know, I had no idea. I just thought we got lucky that we got her. But to hear her say that, that's really a big part of what we try to do here at Upswing. And you know, for all of y'all who are looking at jobs, who are looking at different organizations to go to, you want to make sure that you're looking at that as well, because the paycheck will make you happy. You know, the first couple months that you're there, but it's not going to keep you satisfied after the first, say, year or two, when you keep feeling like your voice is not being amplified and that, you know, your culture, your values aren't being represented. So that's something that I would say for everyone who's here on the call that they should certainly pay attention to when they're thinking about organizations that they either want to start or organizations that they want to work with.
Thank you. Yeah, I think those are all the questions we have in the general chat. I'm not sure if you got any privately, but if you have any remaining questions, feel free to DM in the FAQ channel in our Slack, and we can also send those to Melvin later for him to answer. But thank you so much for an amazing presentation. Yeah.
Thank you all. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
for everyone here, we do have a break from 3:15 to 4:15, or sorry, 3:45 to 4:15 for y'all to work on your projects. And our next talk will be at 4:15 with Shreya, which is talking about designing for trust with your users. So I think it really closely mirrors like what Melvin was talking about. It's going to be like designing with your users, not for them. Yep. Okay. Thank you all. Bye.
All right. Thanks so much. You guys take care. Bye.